In the 1940s, Los Angeles was buzzing with a sound that was raw, electric, and deeply human: jazz. But this wasn't the kind of jazz you'd find in the fancy white ballrooms of Beverly Hills. No, this was black jazz, born from pain, joy, resilience, and pure, unmatched talent. It wasn't polished or packaged to be palatable for mainstream white America. It was messy, real, full of soul, and that's what made it powerful. This music lived and breathed in clubs tucked deep into Central Avenue, the beating heart of Black Los Angeles. These clubs weren't just night spots, they were sanctuaries from a world of segregation, discrimination, and systemic racism. They offered a refuge where Black artists, war veterans, working-class citizens, and dreamers could gather to share their stories, dance away their pain, and for a few hours, feel fully alive. For many, the music was more than entertainment. It was a spiritual experience, a way of reclaiming identity, dignity, and joy in a society that constantly tried to take those things away. Names like Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday, Dexter Gordon, and Charles Mingus weren't just performers. They were revolutionaries. Every saxophone wail, every smoky piano riff, every gut-wrenching lyric was a protest in itself. These artists were telling stories with their instruments that the newspapers wouldn't print and the radio wouldn't play. They pushed boundaries, musically, socially, politically. They infused every note with struggle and triumph, with ancestral pain and future dreams. And for the Black community, they weren't just entertainers. They were symbols of what was possible. They were heroes who stood tall in a city that tried to keep them on their knees. Their presence in those clubs gave people hope. The music was liberation, but in a city like LA, that kind of liberation made the powerful nervous. White LA didn't know what to do with this rising cultural force. On one hand, the city's elites were drawn to it. They couldn't ignore the magnetic pull of Central Avenue, where the most exciting, innovative music in the country was happening. Celebrities, politicians, and even police officers would sneak into these clubs to witness it. But on the other hand, they were terrified by what it represented: the racial mixing, the pride, the autonomy. These spaces defied segregation. They created community across lines that the city worked hard to keep in place, and that terrified those in power. So while white patrons enjoyed the shows and even praised the performers, the city began pushing back hard. Police raids became a tactic of suppression. Club owners were fined into bankruptcy. Zoning laws were twisted to shut venues down, and all of it was done under the guise of law and order, when really it was about maintaining control. The LAPD didn't just target the clubs, they targeted the people. Jazz was quickly associated with vice, crime, and moral decay. They labeled these venues as nuisance properties, despite their cultural and artistic significance. Cops began showing up in force, sometimes undercover, looking for any excuse to arrest someone. They'd plant drugs, fabricate charges, or harass performers as they came and went. Patrons were searched without cause, detained for hours, and publicly humiliated. The goal was to make these clubs feel unsafe, to discourage people from gathering, to stop the music from playing. And it worked. Slowly, venues began to shutter. Others compromised their integrity, playing watered-down music to cater to white audiences. The energy that once made Central Avenue a cultural epicenter was being drained by fear, and with every club that closed, a piece of LA's soul vanished. But despite the pressure, despite the fear, the music didn't stop. It adapted. It went underground. It traveled across cities and inspired new generations. What's often forgotten in mainstream history is that these clubs were not just entertainment spaces. They were fronts in a cultural war. They were platforms for resistance. Every show was a declaration: we are here, we are talented, and we matter. Musicians used their platforms to fund civil rights efforts, host activist meetings, and support each other through thick and thin. The community formed around jazz was a safety net in a hostile city. These artists weren't just fighting to be heard, they were fighting to be free. And through their music, they gave voice to a movement that would ripple across the country for decades. Today, Central Avenue looks very different. Most of the iconic clubs, places like Club Alabama, the Downbeat, the Dunbar Hotel's Lounge, are long gone. Their stories often live on only in grainy photographs, dusty archives, or the memories of the elders who danced there. But their impact is still felt. The foundation they laid helped shape American music as we know it. It also helped shape LA, even if the city still doesn't fully acknowledge it. There are efforts today to revive the spirit, jazz festivals, murals, and documentaries, but nothing can fully replicate the magic that happened there. Because what happened in those clubs wasn't just musical, it was spiritual, it was revolutionary, it was a community pushing back against everything that tried to silence them. So if you ever find yourself on Central Avenue and feel something in the air, a strange warmth, a familiar rhythm, a ghost of a melody, that's not your imagination. That's the echo of resistance, the memory of a time when jazz wasn't background music, but the heartbeat of a people rising up, when black joy was political, when black sound was dangerous, and when a city tried to shut it all down, but couldn't, because true art, true culture, true soul, it finds a way. And in 1940s LA, that way was jazz.